Hello and welcome to the Drexel Interview. I'm your host, Paula Marantz Cohen, speaking to you from the Paul Peck Alumni Center at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Today my guest is the writer and legal commentator Jeffrey Toobin. Mr. Toobin is a Harvard-trained lawyer who began his career in the Brooklyn U.S. Attorney's Office. He went on to become a journalist and is currently a staff writer for The New Yorker and the senior legal analyst at CNN. He's also the author of many books, including The Run of His Life, The People vs. O.J. Simpson, made into an acclaimed FX TV series, The Nine, Inside the Secret World of the Supreme Court, and most recently, American Heiress, the wild saga of the kidnapping, crimes, and trial of Patty Hearst. Jeffrey Toobin, welcome to the Drexel
Hi, Paula.
Interview. So let's begin by talking about the keynote of your career, your interest in the law. Would you say that's true?
I would say that's true.
What brought about that interest? What made you decide to go to law school, and when did that decision get made?
You know, it's interesting. I sort of was always somehow sure I was going to go to law school, even when I arrived at college, although I don't really know how I ever reached that conclusion. Both my parents were journalists, so I always had the sense that, well, that's one thing I'm not going to do. That that was their thing, and they were both interesting people and successful people, but I wanted to sort of make my own mark. And I was always interested in government and politics, and I had an idea about being a prosecutor. So, I think if you had asked me when I arrived at college, I probably would have said, well, I probably will go to law school, and I did go to law school, but all throughout my life, in high school, in college, even in law school, I kept a hand in journalism. I did student journalism. I was at school papers. I started freelancing for the New Republic and other places during law school. So I obviously had this interest, but I always thought it was going to be a sideline.
That's very interesting that your parents were journalists, so you figured out a way to separate but stay connected to them.
That's right. And I sometimes think of it as my genetic destiny kicking in. The way I actually had a serious involvement with journalists is that after I was a law clerk, I worked on the Iran-Contra prosecution. I was the junior member of the team that prosecuted Oliver North. I then wrote a book about that, my first book, which was a first-person book about this then very celebrated case. But at that point, I went back to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn, and I thought, well, the book was interesting, but it was really just sort of a one-off thing. I'm really going to be a lawyer.
So at what point then did the practice of law, I guess the particularities of practicing law versus the generality of writing and talking about the law, when did the second kick in?
Tina Brown was hired as the new editor of The New Yorker in late 1992, and my friend, David Remnick, who was then a young staff writer, said, well, you've written, you think you might want to try to write for The New Yorker. And almost as a lark, I faxed in, people faxed in those days, I faxed in my clips. The editor of Talk of the Town was an Englishman named Alexander Chancellor who didn't know anyone in England. David recommended me. So basically, I faxed in my clips on a Wednesday, and I had a new career by Friday. I mean, the whole thing moved very quickly.
That's unusual for The New Yorker.
Well, it was, but it was a very unusual time, because Tina Brown was, injecting the place with new life and was stirring things up, and the opportunity to hire some new younger, I was younger then, staff writers was part of the idea. So I started writing for The New Yorker in 1993, and in 1994, the O.J. Simpson case happened, and that's what really changed my life.
So the O.J., and that is true, that is the big book that became a big movie. Two big movies, actually, that you were connected to. So tell us about that and covering that.
Well,
were you assigned to that by The New Yorker?
Yes, I was. I mean, keep in mind that in 1994, there was no such thing as a television legal analyst. That job did not exist because there wasn't any real demand. The people didn't cover law that extensively, but because there was so much interest in the O.J. Simpson case, not only did I write for The New Yorker a bunch of pieces about O.J., but I started appearing on television regularly, mostly The Today Show and Larry King Live. And I did it in a very self-conscious way because I wanted to become better known as a writer. And frankly, one of the things I learned is that if people see you on television, they're more likely to talk to you when you are acting in your journalist capacity. So I did that. I then wrote The Run of His Life, which was my first really successful book. I mean, it was a real bestseller, and that got me, to a different level as a writer. And it also, I became the television legal analyst for ABC News after that, and I spent 6 years there before I moved to CNN in 2002.